Elijah was humiliated and thrown out of an elite restaurant solely because he was black, despite his talent and the recognition he had earned among his peers. He was pushed out of the industry, with every door shut in his face, but he didn't give up. Instead, he turned his pain into fuel for the fight. When the people who had once rejected him started losing everything because of their own prejudices, Elijah was already at the top, ready to offer them a choice upon which their lives and careers depended. His response would have shocked even those who had seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Elijah had dreamed of becoming a chef since childhood. He grew up in a small home where his mother prepared breakfast every morning for their large family. It wasn't just food. These were moments of warmth and love that he wanted to preserve and convey through his own dishes. As he grew up, Elijah spent years working hard in various restaurant kitchens, starting from the bottom and gradually gaining experience. His pursuit of perfection led to invitations to culinary events, and he finally received an invitation to visit an elite restaurant frequented by the most influential people in the city. Elijah knew that this evening would be a crucial step for him. He spent a long time preparing, picking out his outfit, and on the day of the event, he confidently entered the restaurant. From the moment he walked in, he felt the stares. A mix of surprise, distrust, and judgment emanated from the people who were used to seeing only their own in such places. He approached the host stand and gave his name. However, the hostess didn't even glance at the list. She looked him up and down, frowned, and in a cold tone said, "Your name isn't here." Elijah tried to explain that he had been invited, but his words seemed to have no weight. Her gaze was filled with disdain. At that moment, a security guard approached and told Elijah to leave the restaurant. Trying to stay calm, he asked on what grounds he was being asked to leave. The answer was simple. "We have our own rules." Without further explanation, he was escorted out onto the street, as if he were a criminal. Standing on the sidewalk under the streetlights, Elijah felt a burning rage welling up inside him. He had never imagined that he would find himself in such a degrading situation, especially in a world where he was judged not by his talent, but by the color of his skin. This moment became a turning point. His anger turned into determination. Elijah vowed to himself that this humiliation would become the foundation from which he would begin his rise to the top of the culinary world, proving to everyone, and first and foremost to himself, that no one could take away his place in this industry. That night changed everything. After that night, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation. He kept replaying the event in his head, reliving the moment he was pushed out of the elite restaurant as if his very presence there had been an insult to the other guests. It seemed like this stain would never be erased. He was a talented chef, known among his colleagues for his unique dishes and innovative ideas. But in the eyes of that hostess and the security guard, he was just another black man who didn't belong in a world of luxury and status. Elijah was in deep internal conflict. His heart was torn in two. One part of him wanted to give up everything. Why continue fighting for recognition in an industry that didn't want to see him as an equal? At that moment, he thought that perhaps it would be better to leave this world that so clearly rejected him, not for what he did, but for who he was. But the other part of him refused to surrender. This part burned with anger and a thirst for justice. He needed to prove that his dignity couldn't be trampled on so easily. He needed to prove this not only for himself, but for all those who faced the same injustice. Elijah remembered his mother, who worked tirelessly to provide for the family, and how she always told him, "They may try to break you, but if you stay strong, no one will succeed." Weeks passed. Elijah tried to distract himself by diving into work, but thoughts of discrimination and injustice continued to haunt him. One evening, while sitting in the kitchen after a long day's work, he realized leaving wasn't an option. If he left, if he gave up on his dream, he would let those people win. He would hand over what was rightfully his. Instead, he decided to fight. He wouldn't just return to the restaurant business. He would reach heights that would be unattainable to those who had once humiliated him. In that moment, his goal became crystal clear. He would become a chef whose name everyone knew. And not just a chef, but a symbol of change in an industry that had long neglected people like him. This goal became his driving force. His pain transformed into fuel for future achievements. Elijah decided he wouldn't just become better, he would become the best. Elijah threw himself into his work with an ambitious goal: to become one of the best chefs in the country. He knew that only through hard work and dedication to his craft could he prove that his talent surpassed any prejudices or stereotypes. Each morning, he woke up with the thought that every dish he prepared was another step toward the summit. In the kitchen, he didn't just see ingredients, he saw opportunities for creativity, self-expression, and the achievement of his goals. His days grew longer and more intense. At first, he worked 12-hour shifts, then 14. He experimented with recipes, found new flavor combinations, and drew inspiration from his culture, creating dishes that told the story of his family and his roots. Elijah sought to blend African culinary traditions with modern cuisine, creating unique dishes that amazed not only with their taste, but also with their concept. Over time, his efforts began to bear fruit. In the small restaurant where he worked, customers started specifically requesting his dishes. Soon, his talent became known not just locally, but beyond the area. Elijah began receiving invitations to culinary events where his dishes delighted critics. But for Elijah, this was just the beginning. Each new success was not just a source of satisfaction, but also a reminder of that night when he was thrown out of the restaurant. He knew he hadn't yet achieved what he wanted. His goal was much higher. He decided that one day his name would grace the covers of culinary magazines and that his restaurants would become symbols of inclusivity and recognition of talent, regardless of race. But despite growing recognition, Elijah didn't forget what he had faced. He saw that the system he worked in was still rife with prejudice and stereotypes. Many talented black chefs remained in the shadows, their careers stunted by the same discrimination he had experienced. This only strengthened his resolve. Elijah decided that his mission was not just to prove his own worth, but to change the industry. He began organizing culinary workshops for young people from disadvantaged areas, inspiring young black chefs not to give up in the face of challenges. He met with other chefs to discuss ideas for creating a fairer and more inclusive system within the restaurant business. His energy and enthusiasm attracted more and more supporters, and Elijah felt that he was on the verge of something significant. His goals became twofold: to prove his worth as a chef and to change the rules of the game in the restaurant industry. This path was difficult, but each new day brought new opportunities, and Elijah was ready to see it through to the end. Elijah continued to gain popularity rapidly. His dishes were becoming increasingly well known, and the restaurants where he worked saw an influx of new customers eager to try his culinary masterpieces. It seemed like he was finally reaching a new level, but as his success grew, new obstacles related to systemic discrimination in the industry began to surface. When Elijah applied for a management position at one of the prestigious restaurants, he was rejected without explanation. Later, he found out from his contacts in the industry that the restaurant owner had preferred a more experienced chef, which was a veiled rejection due to the color of his skin. Elijah was shocked. Despite all his accomplishments, for many in the industry, he still wasn't in his place. Elijah didn't give up. He continued to seek opportunities, submitting resumes to other prestigious restaurants. However, each time he faced the same obstacles. He was treated with condescension. His proposals and concepts were ignored in meetings, and his successes were dismissed as luck or a trend, ignoring his hard work and culinary mastery. Even when his dishes received rave reviews from critics and customers, restaurant management was in no rush to offer him opportunities for growth. At one meeting in the restaurant where he worked, Elijah proposed a new menu concept based on the fusion of African traditions with modern cuisine. However, his suggestion was immediately rejected by the manager, who didn't even bother to discuss his ideas. Shortly afterward, Elijah learned that another, less experienced chef had received the promotion he had long been aiming for. Elijah began to realize that he was fighting not just against individual bias, but also against deeply ingrained systemic problems. The culinary world, as it turned out, was full of unspoken rules that blocked black chefs from advancing up the career ladder, regardless of their talent. The The system was rigged against him, and each of his successes was viewed as an exception rather than the rule. Elijah could have given up, accepting the injustice as inevitable, but instead, this encounter with systemic bias only strengthened his resolve. He realized that his fight was not just for a place in the kitchen, it was for the future of young black chefs who were also facing discrimination. This thought gave him new energy. Elijah decided that it was time not just to fight for his place, but to change the entire system from within. He understood that true victory would not be achieved when he became a recognized chef, but when the industry became accessible to all talented people, regardless of their skin color. After confronting systemic discrimination, Elijah realized that he needed not only personal strength, but also the support of those who had faced similar problems. He decided to seek help from his community, people who, like him, had encountered bias and injustice. Instead of fighting alone, Elijah realized that he could create a movement that would unite people and inspire them to bring about change. He began organizing meetings with other black chefs, waiters, and restaurateurs who had gone through similar hardships. They shared their stories about how their talent and hard work had been ignored, how they couldn't get promotions or open their own restaurants because of systemic barriers. These stories only strengthened Elijah's resolve. He saw that his fight was not just his personal story, but part of a larger problem that many were facing. Elijah knew it was time for action. Together with other chefs and activists, he started creating platforms for young black culinary talents. They organized workshops and masterclasses for those who wanted to learn the culinary arts but lacked access to elite schools or restaurants. These events attracted the attention of local media, and Elijah's project began to be covered by newspapers and bloggers. In addition, he launched a series of pop-up restaurants where he invited black chefs to cook for the general public. These events became a real success. People came not just for the food, but for the unique experience rooted deeply in culture and tradition. Each evening at the pop-up restaurants was dedicated to different aspects of African and African American cuisine. And these events not only attracted customers, but also created a new wave of interest in culinary traditions that many had forgotten. Support from the community became a powerful resource for Elijah. People began to see him not just as a chef, but as a leader who was fighting for justice in the industry. Many started supporting his projects, donating funds to develop the master classes and pop-up events. Elijah was invited to appear on local television programs, where he talked about the importance of inclusivity and fairness in the restaurant business. Over time, this support began to influence larger restaurants as well. Some owners started reconsidering their policies and providing equal opportunities for all chefs, regardless of their background. Elijah saw that his movement was gradually gaining momentum and that he was becoming a symbol of the changes he had long fought for. Now, Elijah had not only a plan, but also the strong support of a community that believed in his dream. He knew that many challenges lay ahead, but now he wasn't alone. With this new resource, he felt stronger and ready to continue the fight, not only for himself, but also for all those who sought justice and equal opportunities in the culinary industry. The success of Elijah's events and his active stance began to attract increasing attention, not only within culinary circles, but also on social media. Elijah realized that to maximize the impact of his movement to change the restaurant industry, he needed to use the powerful tool of the modern age, social media. Elijah began actively sharing stories of black chefs who had faced discrimination on his Instagram and Twitter pages. He posted photos from the workshops, told stories of success from those who had overcome systemic barriers. These posts started to go viral, garnering hundreds and thousands of likes and comments of support. People, many of whom had experienced similar challenges, began sharing their own stories, making the issue of systemic discrimination in the restaurant industry even more visible. One day, a video from one of his pop-up events went viral. In the clip, Elijah spoke about his mission, not just to cook food, but to change perceptions of black chefs in the industry. He talked about how food is an art form that shouldn't have boundaries, and how everyone deserves a chance to showcase their talent, regardless of their skin color. This short yet emotionally charged monologue resonated with thousands of people worldwide. Within days, the video had gone viral, amassing millions of views. Major news outlets wrote about the clip, and even well-known culinary critics and chefs began sharing it, expressing their support for Elijah and his movement. Social media became a powerful tool in his fight. People from different countries started following his work, taking an interest in his projects, and sharing his story. Some celebrities known for their stance on social justice began publicly supporting Elijah, inviting him to their events and shows. This attention not only raised his profile, but also gave him the opportunity to spread his ideas to a broader audience. Elijah also began using social media to highlight issues in the industry that had previously gone unnoticed. He shared stories about restaurants that continued to adhere to racist practices and used his voice to call for boycotts of these establishments. This public pressure began to yield results. Restaurants that had previously ignored the problem were forced to reconsider their policies, fearing the loss of customers and reputation. One day, Elijah received a message from a restaurant that had once rejected him for a job. The owner apologized and offered him an opportunity to collaborate, admitting that they had made a mistake. However, while Elijah was touched by the apology, he declined the offer. He wasn't seeking validation from those who had once rejected him. His goal was greater. He wanted to change the entire system, not just secure a place in a kitchen that didn't value him. Elijah continued to use his platform on social media to inspire other Black chefs and culinarians worldwide. He posted advice, shared his achievements and struggles, showing that success was possible even when the system was set against you. His voice grew louder and his influence expanded. Social media had given him a platform he couldn't have accessed through traditional restaurant circles, and now he was using it to fundamentally change the industry. Elijah began to see the results of his efforts. Many young chefs, inspired by his story, began their careers without fear of facing challenges. They saw in Elijah an example of how one could succeed despite discrimination, and how social media could be used to fight for justice and equality. The more famous Elijah became, the more he faced not only support, but also envy and hostility. His success and growing influence started to worry competitors in the restaurant industry, especially those who clung to old prejudices or felt threatened by his status. They saw that his name had become associated not only with exceptional cuisine, but also with the idea of social justice, and this began to irritate those who were comfortable with the status quo. Some influential chefs began publicly criticizing him. In culinary magazines and industry forums, they claimed that his popularity was based solely on the hype around racial issues rather than on his actual talents. One well-known chef even stated in an interview, "Instead of focusing on the food, he's turning the kitchen into a stage for his social battles. A real chef only cares about taste, not politics." These comments were painful for Elijah. Despite all his determination, the words of his critics sometimes stung. He knew that his success was the result of years of hard work and sacrifice, but some colleagues saw him only as a symbol of changes they weren't ready to accept. These people feared that if individuals like Elijah began to reshape the industry, their influence would wane and they would lose control over the restaurant world, where they had long dominated. In response to these attacks, Elijah decided not to engage in public disputes. He believed that his work and success spoke for themselves. However, the criticism only intensified. Rumors soon began to circulate that his achievements were exaggerated, that he received special treatment due to his activism. Some restaurants that had previously invited him to events suddenly started canceling collaborations, fearing negative reactions from conservative clients. Elijah began to realize that his fight for justice and equality was not only against the system, but also against individuals who didn't want to lose their power and privilege. Despite this, he resolved to stay on course, understanding that change always meets resistance. One of the most unpleasant episodes came when he received a letter from a well-known culinary critic who had previously praised Elijah's work but now suddenly changed his opinion. In the article, the critic wrote, "Elijah Walker is more about the show and politics than about cooking. His dishes no longer impress as they once did. Perhaps he needs to reassess his priorities." Elijah was shocked, as this critic had only recently been praising his dishes and writing positive reviews. This was a clear sign that his success, based not only on culinary achievements but also on social change, had begun to irritate those who feared transformation. Nevertheless, this episode only strengthened his resolve. Elijah knew that if he gave in to the pressure now, all his efforts would be in vain. He continued organizing his pop-up events, working with young chefs, and inspiring them to create a new, fairer industry. Every time someone tried to discredit him, he remembered his goal: to change the system not only for himself, but for everyone who followed him. The criticism from competitors only pushed him to work harder. Elijah realized that this resistance was an inevitable part of the process of change. He continued to focus on what truly mattered: his food, his mission, and his community. Amid the growing resistance from competitors and criticism, Elijah continued to pursue his goals, though the pressure was becoming increasingly palpable. He was accustomed to being in the spotlight, but with so many negative comments, rumors, and envy, his energy began to wane. Nevertheless, he continued working on his projects and promoting the idea of justice in the restaurant industry. One day, during another pop-up event in one of the city's poorer neighborhoods, something unexpected happened. Among the guests was a famous figure, a renowned European chef who was a recognized authority in the culinary world and held several Michelin stars. His name was associated with luxury and high status, and his visit to an event in such an area was a complete surprise to everyone. This chef, Marco Ricci, was not known for his social views or support of activist causes. On the contrary, he was part of the world that Elijah sought to change, part of the old school where issues of justice and equality were never at the forefront. When Marco unexpectedly approached Elijah, everyone froze, expecting criticism or ridicule. However, something entirely different happened. Marco extended his hand and smiled, saying, "Elijah, I've been following your work for a long time. I didn't come here by accident. I want to acknowledge that what you're doing goes beyond ordinary cooking. You're not just preparing food. You're creating a movement. You're changing the rules of the game." These words stunned Elijah. He had not expected such recognition, especially from someone he considered part of the elite that had often stood in the way of his progress. But that was only the first surprise. Marco continued, "I've been thinking for a long time about how cooking can be not just an art, but a way to change the world. I'd like to propose a partnership, not just for one project, but a long-term collaboration. I believe that together we can do something truly important." Elijah was taken aback. He knew that this offer could be a turning point for him and his movement. At first he had doubts. Was Marco sincere, or was this just an attempt to use his popularity for personal gain? But after several meetings and discussions, it became clear that Marco was genuinely interested in making a difference. He told Elijah that he had begun to rethink his career and wanted to use his fame to help change the industry for the better. They agreed to start a joint project, to open a restaurant that would become a symbol of inclusivity and culinary diversity. This restaurant would not only offer unique dishes, but also become a place where young black chefs could start their careers, receiving the support they were so often denied in other establishments. The restaurant's opening generated huge media interest. People were eager to see how two chefs from different worlds could unite their efforts to create something completely new. Many critics who had previously attacked Elijah began to change their opinions, seeing that his work was being recognized even among the most influential figures in the industry. This unexpected turn became a key moment in Elijah's career. Now, his success was not just the result of his own efforts, but also an acknowledgement that his ideas were beginning to reshape the very structure of the restaurant business. His partnership with Marco became a symbol that even those who had once been part of the problem could change and join the movement for justice. This turn of events gave Elijah a renewed sense of energy and motivation. He realized that his struggle was beginning to yield results not only for himself, but for the entire industry. The opening of Elijah and Marco's joint restaurant caused quite a stir. The media widely covered the event, calling it a symbol of change in the restaurant industry. People came not only for the gastronomic experience, but also to support the movement that Elijah was promoting. The restaurant was more than just a place to eat. It was a space for communication, inclusivity, and cultural exchange. However, not everyone was happy with this success. Competitors who had previously criticized Elijah now banded together to undermine his reputation and try to stop his movement. Influential figures in the restaurant industry who didn't want change began spreading rumors that Elijah and Marco weren't capable of running a restaurant at a high level. They said that the restaurant was just another trend that would soon disappear once public interest faded. One day, Elijah learned that several restaurant critics known for their conservative positions had planned to write scathing articles about the new establishment. For Elijah, this was another blow. He knew that these critics could heavily influence public opinion, especially among those who had yet to accept his ideas. Shortly afterward, the first negative reviews appeared. Critics nitpicked every minor flaw, trying to discredit the restaurant. They claimed that the quality of the dishes didn't meet the declared level, and that the restaurant's concept was too politicized. For Elijah, this was a painful moment. Once again, he felt that his talent and achievements were being ignored in favor of prejudice and injustice. But despite this attack, Elijah decided that he wouldn't back down. Instead of falling into despair, he decided to use this situation as an opportunity to prove to everyone that his work had real value. He refocused on what he did best, cooking with soul and inspiration. Together with his team, he began working on a new menu that would reflect not only his culinary skills, but also his values. Every dish became a symbol of struggle and victory, a story that told of his journey and the journey of other black chefs. Once again, social media played a crucial role. As the negative articles began to spread, Elijah's loyal followers and supporters launched a wave of support. People who had already visited his restaurant started posting their own reviews, sharing how impressed they were by the food and atmosphere. These reviews spread quickly, countering the negative criticism. Soon, it became clear that the attempts of competitors and conservative critics had failed. The restaurant continued to thrive, and people kept coming, not just for the food but to be part of the movement. Gradually, critics began to reconsider their positions. In one of the most unexpected twists, one of the most influential restaurant reviewers, who had previously been critical of Elijah's restaurant, published a new article admitting his mistakes. He wrote, "I was wrong. This restaurant is not just a trend or a political gesture. It's a place where every bite of food reminds us that cooking can be more than just food. It's a symbol of change that deserves recognition." This publication was confirmation for Elijah that his work had begun to change not only minds, but also the hearts of people, even those who had initially been against him. Marco supported him every step of the way, and together they created something greater than just a successful restaurant. They had built a place where everyone could feel part of something bigger. A place where talent and effort were valued, not the color of one's skin. Elijah's victory didn't end with the restaurant's success. He was named Chef of the Year at a prestigious culinary award ceremony, a true triumph not only for him, but for all those who had supported him along the way. Elijah took the stage to accept the award, and his speech became the culmination of his entire struggle. This success isn't just mine, it's a victory for all those who have been unfairly sidelined and rejected. Today, I stand here not just as a chef, but as someone who believes that everyone deserves a chance to be heard and recognized. Elijah felt that he had finally achieved his goal, but he knew that his journey wasn't over. His mission continued. He wanted to keep changing the industry, inspiring a new generation of chefs and proving that real change was possible. After receiving the Chef of the Year award and gaining international recognition, Elijah realized that he had a unique opportunity to influence the entire culinary industry. His name was now associated not only with outstanding dishes, but also with the movement for social justice. He felt that it was his duty to use this moment to drive further change. Elijah began actively promoting the idea of creating fair conditions for all chefs, regardless of their background or skin color. He joined forces with Marco and other influential industry figures to launch the Chance for Success program, aimed at supporting young talents from underrepresented communities. The program provided scholarships for training at top culinary schools and offered internships at prestigious restaurants where black chefs or kitchen workers had rarely been seen before. But Elijah didn't stop at support programs alone. He decided to use his platform to directly impact the structure of the restaurant business. He began collaborating with human rights organizations that fought workplace discrimination and worked with them to develop initiatives to improve working conditions and create inclusive work environments in kitchens across the country. These efforts began to pay off. Some major restaurant chains turned to Elijah for consultation on implementing new standards that included training staff on cultural awareness and combating bias. Thanks to his influence and persistence, new rules and practices began to emerge in the industry, making the kitchen a more inclusive place to work. It was a slow but tangible process of change. One of Elijah's most significant achievements was the creation of the Academy of Inclusive Culinary Arts, an educational center where top chefs taught and which was accessible to students from all walks of life. The academy focused not only on teaching culinary skills, but also on promoting the ideals of equality and fairness in the restaurant industry. It quickly gained a reputation in professional circles, and many successful chefs proudly stated that they had started their journey at Elijah's Academy. However, Elijah's successes were not without challenges. Some restaurants and chain owners who still clung to old views actively resisted the changes. They tried to sabotage his initiatives, claiming that his ideas threatened traditional restaurant management approaches and supposedly lowered the quality of work. But Elijah was prepared for the resistance. He understood that such people would always cling to old ways, but he was confident that the power of his movement and community support would prevail. The most striking moment occurred when one of the largest restaurant conglomerates, previously known for its closed-mindedness and conservatism, invited Elijah for consultations to completely overhaul its corporate culture. This step was symbolic. The industry was beginning to recognize the need for change, and Elijah had become the face of that transformation. In parallel with his work in the industry, Elijah continued to inspire a new generation of young chefs. His story, the story of a man who overcame discrimination and became a leader in his field, became a symbol for thousands of people worldwide. His speeches at conferences, on television, and on social media attracted huge audiences. Every time, he emphasized the importance of believing in oneself and persevering despite any obstacles. Elijah knew there was still much work to be done, but now he had a team of like-minded people and community support. He was no longer a lone fighter. A whole movement for equality and justice in the culinary industry had formed around him. His achievements inspired other chefs to join the movement. More and more restaurants began implementing inclusive policies and offering opportunities to those who had previously been rejected by the system. The restaurant business began to change gradually, and Elijah played a significant role in proving that one person, armed with talent and determination, could change an entire industry. Now, Elijah saw his goal not only as creating a successful restaurant or training chefs, but as transforming the restaurant industry into a place where every talent would be given a chance to shine. And thanks to his efforts, this goal became more achievable than ever before. After years of struggle and victories, Elijah reached his main goal. He became not only a world-renowned chef, but also a leader of the movement for equality in the restaurant industry. However, his journey wasn't over. He knew there was still much to be done to ensure that the changes became permanent and reached all levels of the business. The most challenging stage lay ahead, securing these changes at a systemic level. Despite the recognition and success, not everyone who had once humiliated and discriminated against him had changed their views. Many remained indifferent or tried to uphold outdated traditions. But even they couldn't ignore the impact Elijah's work had on the industry. One of the most unexpected turns occurred when the owner of that very elite restaurant, from which Elijah had once been expelled, approached him for help. That restaurant had been struggling with a reputational crisis for a long time. After Elijah's discrimination story became public, the flow of clients began to dwindle, and new competitors, more modern and inclusive, were drawing away their audience. The restaurant owner, Jonathan Marsh, realized that if he didn't change his policy, his establishment might completely lose its popularity and become a relic of the past. He made the difficult decision to turn to Elijah for help. Elijah thought long and hard about the offer. He hadn't forgotten that evening when he was humiliated and thrown out as though he wasn't worthy of entering that restaurant. But now, the situation had changed. He was a man with influence who could help not only himself, but also transform an establishment that had once stood in the way of progress. With a sense of satisfaction and inner calm, Elijah agreed to meet with Jonathan Marsh. They met at the same restaurant, but now Elijah felt different. He was no longer the person who had been rejected. He was a recognized chef and influential public figure. Jonathan offered him a partnership. He wanted Elijah to help rethink the restaurant's concept, adapting it to the new realities of the times. It was a difficult decision for Elijah. He knew that working with a restaurant that had once rejected him might provoke mixed reactions from the community. But he also understood that true strength lay in the ability to forgive and create new opportunities for change. After all, his mission was to transform the industry, and this restaurant could become an important symbol of those changes. Elijah agreed to the partnership, but on his terms. Together with Marco Ricci, they developed a new concept for the restaurant, focused on cultural diversity, inclusivity, and high standards. The restaurant owner agreed to implement a policy of equality, ensuring fair conditions for all employees, regardless of their background. Elijah insisted that young black chefs be invited to the restaurant and given the opportunity to work and learn on equal footing with others. The restaurant's reopening after its transformation generated huge interest. Many were eager to see the restaurant not only as a place to enjoy fine cuisine, but also as a symbol of change in the restaurant industry. The reopening was a great success, and the restaurant regained its popularity, but now with an entirely new image. For Elijah, this was more than just a professional victory. It was a moral victory that showed that even the most closed and conservative structures could change. Jonathan Marsh, the former restaurant owner, eventually acknowledged his mistakes. At the opening ceremony, he publicly apologized to Elijah and everyone who had suffered from discrimination at his establishment. This was an important moment when Elijah's antagonist finally recognized his errors and understood that the future of the restaurant industry was impossible without equality and justice. For Elijah, this was more than just a collaboration. It was an example of how the industry could transform through forgiveness and working through mistakes. He had proven that even the most entrenched prejudices could be overcome if there was a will for change. Elijah had turned one of the places of his greatest humiliation into the symbol of his greatest victory, proving that change was possible even where it was least expected. Years of work, struggle, and triumphs had changed not only Elijah's life, but the entire restaurant industry. His story became a source of inspiration for thousands of young chefs around the world, and his name was now synonymous with change and progress. But Elijah's greatest achievement was creating something that would live far beyond his own career. His legacy spread far beyond kitchens and restaurants, changing attitudes toward equality and justice in many other areas of life. The Academy of Inclusive Culinary Arts, which he had founded, continued to grow, training a new generation of chefs. Each year, Academy graduates received prestigious awards, opened their own restaurants, and became faces of new culinary movements. Thanks to the Chance for Success program, talented young people who previously lacked access to quality culinary education could now learn from the best and reach incredible heights. Elijah remained actively involved in the Academy's work, inviting successful chefs and restaurateurs to share their experiences and inspire students. He often said, "I'm not here just to become successful. I'm here to open doors for those who've never had them opened before." These words became the motto of his life and work. But what mattered most to Elijah was how the perception of black chefs in the industry had changed. In a world once dominated by a certain elite, new voices and new faces representing a diversity of cultures and traditions were increasingly emerging. The restaurant industry had become more inclusive, and although the road to full equality was still long, Elijah could proudly say that he had helped pave that path. His partnership with Marco Ricci was not just a successful project, but a symbol of how different people could come together for the common good. Together, they continued to develop the restaurant, which had become known as one of the most innovative and socially conscious establishments in the country. It was more than just a restaurant. It was a hub for cultural exchange, hosting events dedicated to equality, inclusivity, and social justice. However, Elijah wasn't stopping at what he had achieved. He understood that his mission was more than just creating a successful business or academy. He wanted to leave a mark on society that would help others fight injustice and achieve change. Therefore, he began working with charitable organizations, funding programs to combat hunger and inequality, and actively speaking at international forums, where he advocated for the need to change not only the restaurant industry, but society as a whole. Elijah became the voice of those who had never been heard before. His story, of how he had been thrown out of an elite restaurant and then returned to change the entire industry, became an example for millions of people around the world. Every time he recalled that humiliating evening, he didn't feel anger or resentment. It had become a reminder to him that even the most painful moments could be the beginning of great change. His family, who had always been his source of strength and inspiration, was proud of his accomplishments. They knew that Elijah had become more than just a successful chef. He had become a true leader who had changed the lives of many people. His mother, who had always supported him and taught him never to give up, said, "You've done more than just prove your worth. You've proven that dignity and talent have no boundaries." Elijah knew that his journey was not over. The world continued to change, and with it came new challenges and problems that people faced. But he knew one thing: as long as there was injustice, he would fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. His legacy was not just restaurants, awards, or the academy. His true legacy lay in the fact that he had become a symbol of change, a man who had proven that the world could become better if each of us fought for justice. And now, looking at his work, his students, and his family, Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He knew that his efforts had not been in vain. His dream had become a reality, and his legacy would live on long after him, inspiring new generations not to give up in the face of injustice, but to strive to change the world for the better.